various psychometric assessment tools and therapeutic models such as multimodal therapy, solution-focused and hope-focused therapy, well-formed outcome, cognitive behavioral therapy, and a bunch of other accolades I can add to it. Elvis completed his training in the University of London in the UK. He has a passion for working with individuals and couples. His goal is to build up people and their relationships. He is known for his humor, which I'm sure he will bring to us today as he does in his practice. Ruth, Elvis Sugar Dumpling, has extensive experience working with young people, individuals, and couples. Her professional career has encompassed general counseling and couple counseling with particular interest in sexual abuse and trauma, relationships, and family life. Ruth draws from her own life's experience of sexual abuse and survival to encourage others of the need of forgiveness, ensuing in a richer life. Ruth and Elvis have been married for 20 plus years and are looking forward to growing older together. They're blessed with 3 beautiful children. Today, Elvis and Ruth will be doing their thing and they'll be bringing us some much needed information. So at this point now, I present to you Elvis and Ruth.
Go ahead. Thank you, Ashanti Queen, Sister Lawrence and Brother Lawrence and the bereavement team. And we also like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to the pastoral team and for all those working at the background, making this, possible for my sugar dumpling and I to share with you how to cope with grief. We do know that this is an area that we all have to go through at one point in our lives. But we also know that it is quite unique and different from every one of us. We guarantee you that when you go to school from grade 1 onwards, every year you will learn English, maths, geography, history, science, civics, you name it, you will learn all subjects every single year. But where in the school curriculum have they put down grief? But yet still, this is an important area in our lives that we are left alone wondering how we would adjust it by ourselves. It is healthy that we all learn about this, and we commend Mississauga Church taking the lead role also in doing it. We know other churches are doing it as well. But Martin Luther put it beautiful. He said, unless we attack and we address social issues, psychosocial issues in our churches and in the gospel, it is not a full gospel. Because how come that people will go through, any form of loss, but we will be wondering in ourselves and going through all type of depression, anxiety that affects our spiritual life. And sometimes people are wondering that we've been fasting and praying for you, but you are not really there. And why aren't you connecting spiritually? It's because when you are broken in one area, it has an effect in the other areas. So my sugar dumpling would be going through, we will start off and be going through some, stuff that we have prepared for every one of you. And to begin, I would like to share with you something from the Word of God. I would like you to turn with me to the book of John. John 11, verse 35. John 11, verse 35. The Bible says Jesus wept. Isn't it amazing that we have the shortest verse in the Bible, but yet still it is deep? This shortest verse in the Bible, it is deep But yet still, this is what we all brush under the carpet when it is our turn, leaving ourselves vulnerable when we are going through heartache, leaving ourselves vulnerable because of fear of being abandoned and rejected or being labeled or stigmatized. And because of that, we brush our emotions down, sometimes cultural perspective. But here we are, God himself, he wept. No wonder why we also sometimes become emotional, because we are made in his image. It is an emotion. And how well do we even show our emotion? So we are going to share our screen and go through some stuff with all of you. So, okay. So my sugar will go
hi,
ahead.
good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be with Mrs. Salvi Church once again. So we are going to take a journey through understanding and coping with loss. I know that, like Elvis has said, at some point in our lives, we'll all go through loss, be it through death or being a loss of something. We'll come back to it. So hopefully we've been given 30 minutes. We'll try and unpack everything in 30 minutes. So what are we going to do? We're hoping that by the end of today or this afternoon, that we'll have understanding what loss is and understand the impact loss has in our lives. We're going to, if we have time to reflect on our own experiences and how have we dealt with them, and then looking at ways that we can deal with loss. Okay, so grief, loss, same. What is it? Grief is normal because when we experience a loss, we grieve. And interestingly, grief is not a disease, it's not an illness, it's not a problem that needs fixing. Grief is a natural response to loss. It's a natural response to something that happens to us that, it's really affected and impacted us. It's a natural emotional response to suffering, to hurt, to pain, to something to someone or something of value that's been taken away from us. So Dr. Bill Webster, he says that grief is the normal but bewildering cluster of ordinary human emotions arising on response to a significant loss, intensified and complicated by the relationship we have lost. I'm sure you will agree with us and with him that exactly this, exactly what we go through is just ordinary human emotions that becomes intensified based on how intense the significant loss is on us. So, like we've said, we have death, and we have death is something that, like Elvis said, we'll all go through. At some point in our lives, we will experience death. We will experience death either from our own family members, from our extended family members, from our friends, from church members. So it's death. And then also we want to look at secondary loss or secondary, we don't really call it secondary death, it's secondary loss. So in talking about secondary loss, this also, I'm sure we can all recognize and resonate with, through loss of income, through loss of financial, loss of identity, loss of hope and dreams, loss of health, loss of a home, loss of support system, loss of security. I'm sure you can name with me many different types of losses that you have experienced or that we could experience. I know that when we moved here 12 years ago, I would say that we lost our security, our secure system. We lost our home. We lost what was comfortable to us. We lost the surroundings of our family and friends, our support system. We lost a home, but we didn't look at it, and to a certain degree, we did grieve and continue to grieve over those losses, because when we think about it, we still miss our family and friends. We still miss fish and chips. If you haven't had fish and chips, you'll know that it's one thing that we love. Well, I particularly love. Every time I go to England, it's the first thing that I have is fish and chips. I miss that. It's a loss, but it's not a loss to the extent where it's causing me grief or depression. Not to that extent. With those particular losses, you losing your employment, losing your home, these can cause intense impact that can create depression that will warrant some psychological help or some assistance. So hopefully we have an understanding. We have death, and then we have loss. Okay, so there are some myths surrounding grief that I think would be good for us to take a look at, because we're all very well-meaning, but sometimes we say things that might not be helpful, or just because we don't understand. So there's a myth that says pain will go away faster if you ignore it. If we ignore pain, it will go away faster. What do you guys think? Put your thumb up if you agree, or thumb down if you disagree. Let's have a look. Okay, I see one thumbs down. All right. What do the majority think? Up or down?
We cannot see everyone.
Oh, we can't see everyone. Okay. All right. Well, let's see.
So, trying to ignore your pain or keep it from coming up will even make things worse. So for real healing, it is imperative that we face our grief and actively deal with it. And here is the thing. When you keep emotions hidden in you, one author puts it beautifully. He said that it forms an iceberg inside of you. And mind you, it is this same iceberg that sank the great Titanic. So how many times are people sinking because they are hiding emotions inside of them? So you keep hiding it. So I have a bottle here. Imagine this one is Sprite. And I keep shaking it because I'm hiding something. It's building up. One day I open it. Guess what happened? It explodes like a volcano. So it's not about ignoring the pain. It's not about ignoring or brushing under the carpet what is going on inside of you. But when you actively move forward, you deal with it, then it will be healing. It will be therapeutic for you. Then we have got myth number 2. Go ahead, huh?
It's important to be strong in the face of loss.
We know that this one can sometimes be cultural or sometimes based on the gender, men and women. Sometimes we know our men want to put a brave front. They want to bring in that, so you know what? I need to be brave for the family, and that I should not express my emotions. But feeling sad, frightened, even lost in your world of thinking, lonely, these are all normal reactions to loss. When you go through all of these important feelings, it is an expression that you deeply care as to whatever that is going on. You see, you are not expressing it in a way that people have got the mindset that, oh, you are weak, you are not strong. When it comes to this, there is nothing about being weak or strong. So crying doesn't mean, like I have said earlier, that you are weak and that you are not strong. It means that you deeply care. Why are you bringing the tears? It's because you have gone through that emotional loss, you've gone through that heartache, you're going through the loved one that you used to hang around with, it's no longer there. So you are going through emptiness. So Jesus wept. A whole lot came in there. Why are you hiding emotion when God himself, he decided that he is going to let it out? It is nothing to do with weakness. But in fact, when you let the tears out, it also helps heal your spiritual connection as well.
So the next one is, if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. Sometimes we get asked this question, oh, this so-and-so is not crying, or our children are not crying, or, I'm being told that I don't care, or I'm heartless because I'm not shedding tears. The truth is, just the same way that we all have different personalities, we're all different, we come from different environments, different geographical locations, we shed tears at different times. So crying is, as it has already been said, it's a normal process. It's normal to sadden, but it's not the only way that we show that we're sad. Crying is not the only way. So those who don't cry may feel the pain just as deeply as those who cry. They simply have other ways of showing it, or at different times of showing it. I personally haven't experienced death. When I say personally, in terms of my family, I'm fortunate to have my both parents still alive. My dad is 1992. But I think that one of the first experience I had was Elvis's grandmother. Remember when we went to Ghana, and it was different. The culture is different. In the Bible where they put on sackcloth and put ashes on their head, it's similar in Ghana. It's like 40 days.
Yes.
It's 40 days of weeping and gnashing, literally. And they hire professional criers. I don't know whether I'm not sure the geography of those on
they have it in the
but I'm not sure whether in the Caribbean you guys have it as well.
They have it too.
But for me, even though I am Ghanaian but raised in the UK, it was incredible. It was
a cultural shock.
It was a cultural shock because we were walking. One time we were walking with Elvis' mom, having a conversation, laughing. Then within minutes, she noticed her brother coming towards us. Immediately, she started crying and wailing and talking. I was like baffled. I was like, what's going on? Did something just happen? But I got to understand it's a cultural way. And it's how you express the loss that's going on. So that's another way of expressing the sadness that you feel.
And sometimes some people feel that should grief last about a year? How long do you have to grieve for? You see, there is no right or wrong way in grieving and how long it takes. We visited the family that unfortunately, their loved one passed away. And this young guy said that, Elvis, is something wrong with me? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, my siblings, they all crying for mom and everyone crying, including my dad, but I'm not crying and people think I'm weird. And I said, you are not weird. And I said, imagine you go and visit a dentist to extract your tooth. When you go, they inject you, you feel numb, you don't feel anything there. But when you come home, sometime maybe in an hour or 2 hours, it's wearing off and you start feeling the pain. He said, everyone is different. Everyone connects and adjusts to grief differently. So for some people, immediately they might be numb that, they might not feel it. But sometime where along the line, maybe in 6 months time, maybe in 1 year, maybe in 5 years, something may come and it may trigger it. So grief in itself, it comes and it goes. We have what we call the grief attacks. It comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. So the expectation of people sometimes putting you in the box or putting you within boundaries that, okay, now you've waited for 8 months, it's okay, now you move on. Or sometimes they say, last week you were okay, you were having fun. Today, what is wrong with you? It's because it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes.
I'm, again, in the Ghanaian culture, especially when a family member, when your spouse or your mom dies or your parent died, the expectation is that you grieve for a year. Mm-hmm. And in that year, you have to wear black. The whole, like, especially if you're going out in public, you have to wear black and your hair has to be covered.
In black.
In black, yes. So that is a cultural context. Does that mean that when I go to a different part of the world, I have to behave that way? Well, that's really up to you. That's a personal choice. And again, it's cultural, it's not biblical. I don't know, is it biblical?
The way how they put it, they have brought elements of the biblical context into it. You remembered when David's son passed away, he put on the sackcloth, put on ashes, and God at some point said, okay, enough is enough, you move on.
I think Job also,
that's right. And also when Saul passed away, Samuel was weeping and crying, and God came and said, okay, enough of the weeping, it's time to go on. But what we are saying that it is a myth what we have been brought up with, but also connecting with your emotions and knowing that it is okay to take your time to go through the healing process. It is okay.
It is. Nobody should be telling you it's okay, stop grieving, move on, get out of bed, and all of those things. Usually people that care, loved ones and family members feel that they care about you and that they're helping you. When it gets to situations where the grief becomes chronic, then we know that help must be sought. You have your grief process, but sometimes it does get to a situation where it becomes chronic and you will need help. So what types of emotional responses do we go through? We say that the significant the loss, the more intense the grief. What does that mean? The person who passed away, how are they related to you? How close was that relationship? How important was that relationship? How is it impacting on you? How old are they? How young are they? All of those things have an impact on how we grieve. Sometimes we say that, do you grieve when your spouse who was abusive has died, compared to a spouse that has cancer and died? Which do you agree? Which one is more significant?
Or, losing a 1-year-old and losing a 100-year-old, or from a sudden heart attack, or losing someone with a long-term illness. And Ruth just expressed that losing an abusive husband or losing a loving spouse, which one is more painful? Everyone will relate to grief differently. Because someone that may lose a loving spouse may not be going through all those emotional responses, but someone that maybe had, lost, an abusive spouse will not even stop crying, and they will always be going. People say, what is wrong with you? Aren't you happy that this person is not here to abuse you anymore? It's because everyone deals with grief differently.
Absolutely. And also taking into consideration the primary death and the secondary. So sometimes, you may go to a funeral and you don't even know the person who's passed away, or you're not that connected, but you're grieving, you're crying uncontrollably. It's not necessarily because of that person, but it's the trigger. what has triggered in you? What are you remembering? Are you remembering somebody that passed away? Are you remembering a situation? All of these things take into effect in terms of how we all grieve differently. I remember my very first client as a psychotherapist back in England. My very first client was a Caucasian person who came for counseling because their dog passed away. Their pet dog had died. And me, I don't like dogs to start off with. I got bitten when I was young, so I'm afraid of dogs. And then to sit there as my first client to discuss the death of a pet, immediately after that session, I went straight to supervision and said, what am I supposed to do with this? I can't connect. But my supervisor led me to understand everybody's grief is different. How significant was this pet to my client? And when I went back to explore, it turns out that the pet was her only friend. They lived in the countryside where they didn't have any neighbors close by, and they didn't have siblings. And so the person, can I call it that? Or the significant something in her life was the pet that they had had for over 15 years. So that got my mind thinking, that is true. It's not only a person that you grieve over, but different things. So how do people grieve, or what are the influences of grief? We've talked about it as we've gone along. So we've talked about the quality and type of relationship the person has, how or when and where the person died. Is it a sudden death? Is it expected? Is it violent? Was it peaceful? All of these impact. Again, we've talked about the age, the gender, personality. Men and women grieve differently. Were there any previous losses that's compounding to this? Have we even taken the time to grieve? And more deaths or more losses are coming on. Like Elvis says, becomes a volcanic eruption after a while. Cultural and religious beliefs and influences, and how much are we involved in the mourning rituals, in the grieving process, in the viewing of the body after death and attending the funeral, and all of those things are preparations. I'm sure that Luann Jones will talk more about this. But I know that in some cultures, children are not allowed at funerals. I know in some cultures that if, for example, if my child has died, because I'm older and the expectation is that children are supposed to die before their parents, I as a parent, I'm not allowed to attend my child's funeral. Now these are things, cultural expectations or cultural influences that can impact also on our grief. So how do we deal with loss? And please remember, we're kind of skimming through this pretty quickly. We're touching on a few things. Hopefully after Joanne speaks, we have some time, we can come back and have more conversations and questions and answers. But let's go quickly to, let me see, we didn't talk about the types of emotions people go through. So depression, anxiety, loss of appetite, numbness, crying, guilt, anger, depression. We have the different stages of grief that people go through. And so all of those things, we go through them at different stages.
I want to highlight the grief attacks. One element in the grief attacks, we already said that it comes and it goes. It's like a roller coaster. And sometimes when you bury a loved one, say for an example, and they sing a particular song, which the most popular one is, "Shall We Gather at the River?" And this would be burned in your mind with the emotion. So what happened is that even if you are at church and maybe they're singing certain hymn now, it triggers something in you. because at that time, your mind that was bent, putting a loved one into the ground, had resurfaced because of the song. It could even be smelling the fragrance of a loved one. It can also trigger. Or it could be
music.
Music.
Hearing a certain type of song on the radio.
Or even birthdays, which we will come to.
Or even just going to certain places. But let's go to how then do we deal with these? Well, we can turn to friends and family. This is a time that friends and family are important, even more so important that we can lean on. Just taking time to being close to a loved one. Some of us, we avoid going to visit somebody that has a loss because we don't know what to say. But the thing is just being there, your presence, sitting, helping to clean the house, bringing food. And I think in our community, we do that very well, supporting family and friends in that way, in bringing food and things like that. But even in doing so, with all good intentions, and we are there every day supporting, let us also be mindful of boundaries and giving space for the bereaved one to also have time for themselves to share their tears and to grieve in privacy if that's what they need. As Christians, we can certainly draw on our faith and our beliefs, reading the Bible, going to church, praying, meditating, having our brethren from church come visit us. All these can be helpful. But also let us remember, and we'll come back to it, but let's remember, let me just say it whilst I'm here, let's be mindful the types of scriptural verses we are quick to recite for loved ones. All things work together for those that love the Lord. It might be the case, but is it appropriate at this particular time? Is that the time to say, give it all to God? God knows best. That's not the right time. So let's be mindful of that. Go ahead.
We also want to highlight the importance that when loved ones, especially in our faith community groups, when we hear that someone, they've passed away, immediately you see people flooding to the house. We all mean well. Why? Because we are there to be around, show presence, support. But the real work starts after the burial. Because after the burial, all the people that have been there before the burial, huge support system, people cooking, people coming to even overwhelming, to even sleep at home. We should be mindful of this as faith community groups, that we mean well, but after the burial, this is where the real work begins. Because whoever that is going through the loss, they wake up one day and they look around and there is nobody. And that is even a big rejection and abandonment right there, because the emptiness becomes overwhelming. It becomes real.
So this is a time when, if people are not around, join a support group. There are a lot of support groups around that you can join in, that you can share your sorrow with others who have similar losses and can help. This is a time that perhaps you may want to reach out for therapy, for counseling, for grief counseling, when things are still overwhelming for you. So let's facing your feelings. You can try to suppress your grief, but you can't avoid it. In order to heal, let's acknowledge the pain. We've talked about this earlier on, that trying not to cry, trying to keep it in, trying to hold it, trying not to show it. Sometimes we don't want our children to see that we're grieving, but we don't realize that our children are also grieving. Whatever you've lost, your children have lost. They also going through. And sometimes they take after. They don't want to cry because they don't want to upset their parents, or they don't want to upset so-and-so. So you know what? I'm also going to keep it. But when they see that you're also expressing and showing emotion, it makes it okay for them also to express and even to come and talk about it. Writing out your loss, journaling, using journal to write down how you're feeling, how you feel, writing letters, grief letters. In therapy, we have a process where we ask our clients to write grief letters. How do you feel? Are you angry? It's okay to write down all your emotions to that person. That person's gone. They're not going to read it, but it's cathartic. It's good for you to put it down in writing. I'm angry. I'm this. I'm that. I'm that. And then you write another letter responding where you're kind of feeling good, or the loved one is responding to you as if they're responding to you to say, you know what, it's okay. It's fine. It's okay to be angry. It's normal to be angry. All of those things. We can share some of those, that process with you at a later date. But also take care of yourself. Your body and mind are connected. When you feel physically ill, you feel emotionally ill. So
and
make sure
the spiritual one, it is very important that if you are not well emotionally, mentally, physically, it affects your spiritual connectivity. You see, it's all together, it's intertwined. So we cannot deal with one and remove the other one. And this is where it becomes holistic. That you feel that you are angry because maybe, your anniversary is here, or maybe you have a milestone, or you have some holidays, Christmas. And the first Christmas, you lay the table and you lift your head and say, oh my goodness, my child is not here, my spouse is not here, my mom, my dad is not here, because this will be the seat that they will be sitting in. Sometimes you become angry that the loved one have left you. It is okay to validate and acknowledge your anger, that you don't, remove it and just
brush it aside.
Brush it aside. And for Christians, I want to speak to our Christian brethren. Sometimes when we're going through this anger tendencies, we feel that it is too sinful to even become angry. It is okay. Anger is an emotion. 379 times anger was recorded in the Old Testament. 321 times it was directed at God himself. And the anger of God was kindled against the children of Israel. God's wrath. No wonder why we were made in his image, that we also carry that emotions too. But instead of expressing and bringing anger in a destructive way, you can put it in a constructive way. So this is where you go through therapy, you deal with it, then you go through support group, you deal with it. You have circle of friends that are helpful, or with you, even your minister and some of the elders that will listen to you and help you go through this process. It is therapeutic.
Right. I know that our 30 minutes is up, so I'm just showing it some unhelpful things that people say. I'm sure you may recognize them. I know exactly how you're feeling. No, you don't know exactly how I'm feeling, because we're not the same. You may have experienced death and I may have experienced death, but we are experiencing it different ways. So that's not a very helpful statement to say. It's a blessing in disguise. Time is a great healer. None of these statements are helpful. So then what should we say? Again, not mentioning the person that has passed away, being told to get on with life, being told to cheer up, being told not to cry. These are not helpful. So what are helpful? And I know I'm skipping through quite quickly. I'm sorry to hear about the death of your mother. I'm sorry to hear about the death of your son. I'm sorry to hear about the death of your spouse, of James, of Jones, of whoever. I can't imagine how you're feeling. I can't imagine. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what's going on for you. I'm here to listen to you. You don't need to be in a rush. I'm right here beside you. So let us say something that is more helpful than not.
And one thing that we should also be very mindful is that when maybe a spouse dies, for an example, and somebody sees the other one, they say the widow. Yes, but what happened to his or her name? Don't they have a name? They do have a name. It is okay to mention the name and not quickly replace it quickly with something else. It is very important. You see, we've grown up, culturally, that we have picked up a whole lot of things along the way. That is all that we know. Because if the only tool you have is a hammer, anywhere you go, you look for a nail to hit it. So you can only give what you have, because if you plant apples, you will not reap pineapples. So based on how we have conceptualized, or we have had our own understanding about how to grieve, how to relate, how to behave, and how to go about things, that is all that we know. But I'm so happy that we're looking at the way forward, learning differently, getting education. Our people perish for lack of knowledge. When we have knowledge about what grief is all about, know that the Ferrero Rocher chocolate, when you take the wrapper off, all the peanuts is not positioned at exactly the same place. You look at it, open the other one, it's scattered all around. That is how people also go through. They go through the grief differently. We're going to share some scriptures about the hope that we all have moving the way forward.
So Psalms 34:18 reminds us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those who are crushed in spirit. We have this hope. And again, we'll use these texts at appropriate times. If the spirit of him that raised up Jesus from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Christ from the dead should also quicken your mortal bodies by his spirit that dwelleth in you. He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord will wipe away tears of faces.
See,
joy comes in the morning.
Weeping
may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. We know that we will find solace in God. We know that we will find solace. We know that we who are believers, by God's grace, we will meet our loved ones in heaven one day. So let us be encouraged as we think on these things, and we invite Luann to take over. I think, Dave, we're right on time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me stop this.
Yes. Thank you. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heavens. Ecclesiastes 3. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. As we go through and we listen through the presentation from Ruth and Elvis, one of the key points about that Ecclesiastes 3 that I want to remind us of is a time to keep silence and a time to speak. in our moments of grief and in our moments of grief sharing, we may want to come up with, you know, quote unquote Christian cliches or words that we think might be of comfort. But sometimes even in our quest to to say the right words, even those right words may sound wrong at the right time or at the wrong time. So I want to thank both Ruth and Elvis for that presentation. At this point in time, Georgia will give a thank you, an official thank you to Ruth and Elvis. And we know they're not going anywhere. So, and following Georgia's thank you, we'll get a special music from Ryan Walters, and then I will introduce our next presentation. So over to you, Georgia.
Oh, hi, Ruth. Hi, Elvis. On behalf of the bereavement committee, I would like to say a big thank you for your presentation. Death, loss, and grief is a process that we all have experienced in our life at some point. As a church, I know that we all grieve together. No one knows, you know, when we will experience that. And no one is an island. No one stands alone. We all need each other. So we were created to depend on each other. So let us continue to be our brothers and sisters' keeper. And let us, you know, be always ready to help whenever we can. So thank you so much for your continued support to the Mississauga Seventh-day Adventist Church. And may God continue to bless your ministry and, you know, as you prosper and continue to do God's work. Thank you so much.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. Just want to thank Sister Lawrence and the team for inviting me to participate in this program. Very important and informative session. Just want to also offer a word of encouragement to those who mourn, you know, those who have lost loved ones, especially recently. That, you know, as Christians, we know we don't mourn in vain. But we look forward to that day when we will see our loved ones again in the earth made new. So let's just remain faithful. I'm going to be singing the hymn number 461, Be Still My Soul. Be still my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, He faithful will remain. Be still my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as He has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. all now mysterious, shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, the hour is hasting on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for that beautiful hymn. So our next presenter today is Luann Jones. Luann Jones is the owner and CEO of Covenant Funeral Home in Scarborough. It's Canada's first Black-owned funeral home. Luann calls what she does a passion and a service. Luann has something in common with Ruth and Elvis in that she also migrated to Toronto from the UK. Now, I don't know who came first, but it does not matter. I know just having Luann in our presence and Elvis and Ruth, we know that good things come from the UK. And I hope that Luann and Ruth will be encouraging others to join them here so we can benefit from the amazing work and service that they do. Luann was born in London, and like I said, she migrated here to Canada. And she says, each morning, it's about how I can be of service to a family and in what capacity. She loves what she do, and at the same time, she says, I respect life and I respect being able to get up every morning. Some don't wake up. And in Luann's line of business that she does, she knows that maybe in a more personal note than most of us does. Even we all may have suffered a loss. She goes on to say that life is too short and you should pick and choose your battles, what you let get to you and who you let bother you. Luann today will be bringing to us a presentation and giving us some first-hand knowledge of do's and don'ts, what to expect and what not to expect during the final planning arrangements when we lose a loved one. So Luann, once again, I want to thank you so much for being a friend of Mississauga Seventh-day Adventist Church and for the wonderful service that you've presented to us here as a body of believers. And I will now leave it up to you to share with us and impart with us the awesome knowledge and experience that you have. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Sabbath to you. I hope you are all blessed, and I am so grateful to be a part of the presentation and dealing with Sister Lawrence and Sister Raymond and Brother Dave. And thank you, Elvis and Ruth, for your insightful information. Absolutely on point. The little bits and pieces that I did gather, it's often seen and shared within what I'm going through here at the funeral home and in meeting and dealing with families on a regular basis. The different stages of grief, I've gone through those different stages as well, and key points when going through grief or when somebody has suffered a loss, in saying, I know how you feel, is an absolute untruth. Because nobody can know exactly how you feel unless you've actually walked or you're walking in those shoes at that present moment. So I thank the both of you for your insight, and it's refreshing to have you as Christians, you know, sharing your knowledge with everybody that you can. So for those who don't know me, and I think I know a few of you that I see here on the Zoom today. My name is Luann Jones, and yes, I am the owner and managing funeral director of Covenant Funeral Homes located here in Scarborough. I'm actually situated at my office right now, conducting this Zoom. Covenant Funeral Home was born, I would say, conceived over 20 years ago. The thought of me having my own funeral home, being able to serve my community, was top of mind, and at that time, a long-term goal that I had set when I entered the gates of Humber College North Campus in the 90s. The vision was there, and my dream was to own and operate my funeral home one day. That day came 18 years later, and I have had no regrets in terms of serving families, giving loved ones that comfort and that peace of mind, knowing that their family member has been taken care of in a dignified, respectful, and reverent manner. For us, presentation is everything, and I think sometimes that may fall short within certain communities as well that are providing services for us. So to be able to provide that specific service, this specific service for my community in terms of knowing how to prepare, how to preserve, how to present, culturally specific, is important, and is also a blessing to be able to do so. So I'd like to just go through the funeral process, and again, the do's and don'ts, the needs, the necessities, things that aren't as necessary that you may think you actually have to have in getting funeral services or pre-arrangements or arrangements in place for yourselves. So death in a whole is one of those things that we never want to deal with. It's like the elephant in the room. We know that we are going to pass eventually, and I conducted a service yesterday, and the pastor couldn't be more on point. He said that there's a 1 in 1 chance that someone will pass away. So that 1 in 1 chance, it could be me, it could be you, it could be your significant other. We don't know, but we know that one day that number will come up, and it's not one of those things where we can say, you know what, I'm not ready yet, come back later on. We have to be ready at all times, and sometimes people are ready and sometimes we're not, like the majority of us. Typically we want to live for as long as we can, but unfortunately the world wasn't made that way. God didn't create us that way because of imperfection. So in anything that we do in relation to funerals, some preparation must be made. It's one of those things where we begin the conversation and don't really want to follow through on hearing anything else, because it brings us closer to one's own mortality and the fact that we're not going to be here forever. We're not going to have our significant others forever. We're not going to have our loved ones forever. So it's a sense that we have to come to terms with that. And in anything that we do, there always must be some form of preparation, whether or not we like it or not. I go back to when I used to do presentations in church, and I started out presenting to, I think one of my first presentations that I had done was with Ruth, Seventh-day Adventist, and at that time, Pastor Hazelwood was at that church. And I remember doing a little bit of research and using scripture as reference in terms of preparation and planning. And in doing so, one of the things that I had found out was the crucifixion, the tomb that Jesus was laid in. It didn't belong to him, but belonged to Joseph. Joseph Arimatheus, I believe it was. He had purchased, or he had that tomb prepared for himself. And the tomb that Jesus was buried in was actually a borrowed tomb. So pre-planning goes back to essentially way back then. So that in itself should give us the insight that we need to get things in place. You know, details are very important. As an example, in life, I have some allergies, and although beautiful as they may look, and I don't think my flowers behind me have any hints of them, but lilies, white Casablanca lilies. White Casablanca lilies in my presence make me sneeze, my eyes water, I heave, I can't breathe. So come that time, and those of you who possibly may be present, maybe not, can send my family a reminder that Luann did not like lilies. They look beautiful, but if they're presented beside me in my casket as I lay there, I'm gonna get up and start sneezing. So it's my wish that I don't have Casablanca lilies, because again, I don't like them. Roses, I love flowers, all types of flowers. I love fragrances. They say, the saying is, don't bring me flowers when I'm gone. I want loads of flowers. And bring me flowers while I live. Yes, I love those too. I'll accept those. But the reflection of me is very floral. I like beauty. And again, as Ruth, you resided in England. I love my English garden. So that must be a depiction of me and, you know, who I was at that particular moment. And again, hopefully that's not for a long time, but again, planting that seed. So again, it's one of those things where we have to think about what we would like to have, what we would like to see, and what we don't want to like, what we don't want to see at a funeral or our particular funeral. So come that time of one's passing, you have already gone through those different stages of grief. When you get that diagnosis, or your loved ones have been diagnosed with something, you start planning in your mind. They're planning in their mind, you know, and going through that roller coaster of emotions. So as a family in a whole, it's a you know, a journey that can't even be described unless you're actually going through it. You know, the decisions that have to be made, the people that have to be notified, things have to be done in a timely manner come that time of a death. And in pre-planning and planning ahead, a lot of those things and decisions might be eliminated. So I'll take you through that particular process at that moment. So it can go one or two ways. Possibly there may be a diagnosis of an illness, And it could be a matter of time. It could be a longer time. It could be a shorter time. We would never know. But a diagnosis is there. Or it could be the scenario where, you know, you just want to be financially responsible and save your family the burden and the emotional drain of pre-planning your funeral. So we'll take it in the sense that, okay, a death has occurred for whatever the reason is. So somebody has passed away. What do you do? Number one, depending upon whether or not that person has been in the care of a physician for a long time and the death is anticipated, or the death might be sudden. We'll deal with the anticipated death at the moment. So you know that the death is going to occur. The nurses and doctors have given timelines of prognoses and, you know, durations, and that day has come. So you would be calling either that doctor that has been attending, but you definitely wouldn't want to call the EMS services, because they're going to be calling the fire department, they're going to be calling the ambulance, they're going to be calling the police. When the EMS is called, you're calling in terms of, you know, getting that person revived, resuscitating that person and getting them to the hospital to take care of them. In the case where it's an anticipated death, we know that it's gone far beyond that level of care, and typically there would be nothing that would be able to revive that person because you're at the end of life stages. So what do? You definitely have to call the doctor. The doctor would do the prognosis or at that time and declare that person deceased. The doctor will sign a medical certificate of death. The funeral home needs to be contacted as well, but the funeral home can't remove the body until that medical has been signed. And essentially that is our permission to remove the deceased out of the home, out of the hospital, wherever the death has taken place. So the funeral directors and staff, they may come and do the removal. The removal itself would be a very, very emotional time. And again, this is the time where the funeral home is coming with that vehicle, and it's usually a dark vehicle, and they're bringing in their stretchers into the home, bringing in sheets, typically they're white sheets, placing the body onto the stretcher and placing the straps to secure that person, and then the dreaded moment where the body is actually placed in the pouch and that pouch is actually zipped up. That's the finality of it at that time. And that would be coming to terms with reality, knowing that that person is no longer coming back to the home. Once the body leaves, or once the transfer is completed, the individual is taken back to the funeral home where preparations will begin. Prior to the preparations beginning, a conversation has to be made with the family in terms of how you wish your loved one to be prepared. When are you thinking of having a service for their loved ones? And are there any special requests in terms of, you know, delays or things, other special things that need to be done? Once that person is in our care, we do a process in which we call embalming. And embalming is a process where we're going to preserve that person for the duration here with us, be it a couple of days, a couple of weeks. It could be no more than a month, but we actually do keep people here for that time so that their family members can come in for services and have the opportunity to say their last and their final goodbyes. During the time of preparation as well, I personally like to have a picture so that I know exactly how to prepare the loved one and how to present them as they would have looked somewhat in life, you can't typically bring that person, you know, back to that exact state, but we try and do things as close as possible in terms of how that person used to look in a peaceful manner. So those are a few of the things that we have to do in terms of decision making. Those decisions need to be made pretty much right at that time. Then you'll come into the funeral home, or like I normally do, I come to you and I ask you a few sensitive questions in terms of, you know, the financial aspect of it and what you would like to spend. But before we get into the financial details, I'm asking questions like, what was your loved one's mother's name? Or sometimes it could be, let's say it was a grandmother or a mother had passed away and children are making the arrangements. We need to know grandma's name. Well, we don't know grandma's name. We just call her mama, or we just called her Miss So-and-so. We didn't actually know what their name was. And again, because traditionally, and we'll speak about culturally, sometimes you don't ask those questions, and if you ask certain questions, you might be found as too forward. You know, when was grandma born? Like, why do you want to know that? You know, that's telling a woman's age. Or who was grandma's father? Why do you want to know that? So those are things, and they're key things, and they're very, very important things, because that helps differentiate each individuals. And you might have people with the same name, John Smith. Okay, well, Mr. John Smith was born in Toronto, Ontario, but if you Google the name John Smith, I'm sure there'd be thousands of John Smiths. Well, we go into the next process of elimination. John Smith's father was Albert Smith. Where was Albert Smith born? He might have been born in Scotland. John Smith's mother's name was Marianne. Marianne could have been a Smith, could have been a Brown, but we need to have as much information to differentiate. And we do have some information. We also have social insurance numbers, and social insurance numbers are exclusive numbers to our person. There's no person here within North America that would legally have your social insurance number. And there's so many things, and we can go into identity theft and people assuming other people's names and working under other names. But in terms of death, we need to get as much information as possible so that the death can be registered with the province. So we need full names, possibly including middle names. We need a social insurance number. We need a place of birth. We need a date of birth. And as mentioned, we need parents' names and also at times their places of birth as well. Worst case scenario, you don't have that information. Then on our document, that information, that place where that information is supposed to be put in would be placed as unknown or unavailable. Again, it's important that you try and get as much information as you can, but understandably, we know that there are times where you truly don't have that information available, so we do put it as unknown. Occupation, what that person did in life. If a person has passed away after retirement age, some people say, well, they were just retired. But for statistical purposes, and again, for government documentation, they'd like to know what type of industry that person may have worked in during life, because based on statistics, they might want to check to see whether or not that death particularly was related to some work hazard or you know, some work-related disease that might have contributed to that person's death. So analytically, they have their reasons as to why they're gathering all of that information. And I've met some people that found that information, divulging that information to be somewhat, you know, intrusive. But again, this is a government document and they just want to keep the information exact. So again, we're just trying to provide as much information to them as possible to do their registration of the death. So like any birth, like any marriage, a death has to be registered within the province. And again, because they want to keep tabs on who is passing away, who is being born, who is getting married. So once we do register the death, the government or the province issues us a burial permit. And essentially that permit is permission to bury here locally in Ontario, or to have the body cremated. And typically burial here also constitutes or includes having the body shipped out of the country for burial elsewhere in another country. So those are the few things that would have to be documented to begin the process. So we take the vital statistical information, and once that's been done, we get into the type of services that the family would like to have. Commonly, was the person a member of a church or a religious organization? Were they an active member of a church? Do you want to have a service in the church? Do you want to have a chapel service? So those are things that need to be in place. And also, excuse me for 1 minute, just 1 second. Those are the things that need to be in place, you know, to determine what type of services that person would like to have. Are we going to have a minister officiator service? Are we going to have what we call a non-humanistic service where there is, or humanistic service where there is no religious affiliation, there is no pastor, it's just perhaps somebody just, you know, moderating or saying a few words. You know, was the person, again, associated with a church? Some families, they do wish to have services in a church. Some families wish to have services in the funeral home. Some families, they don't want any service at all, be it because they have either bad relationships with churches, or they're atheists. They don't want any form of service, or they don't want any religious connotation within their services. And all of these things, as funeral professionals, we have to be in tune and non-judgmental. I'll share a story with you. When I just started, we had a family that wanted an immediate cremation for mom. And for me, my mother, I revere my mom, and an immediate cremation is no viewing, no service, place the person in a basic cardboard or plywood container, and that's it. There's no bedding, there's no pillow, there's nothing. And the gentleman came in and said, I want an immediate cremation. And I said, that's fine. But would you want to see your mom? No, I don't need to see her. And for me, it was like, your mom has passed away and you don't want to see her, you don't want to say goodbye to her, you're just placing her in an immediate cremation container, just a plywood box with no bedding, and that's it. In my head, this is what I'm thinking, but that's what he wanted to do. And as a professional, we have to respect, you know, the decisions that each client, each family member wishes to have for their loved one. Different cultures, different traditions, different service times. Culturally, again, specifically about our culture, we celebrate lives. We have large funerals. We have homegoing celebrations, because the funeral, at the end of the day, that's the last thing that we can do for our loved one, and it's a reflection and a legacy of who that person was. So we want to have the music, we want to have the eulogies, we want to have the tributes, we want to have the photos, and at times we want to have flowers as well. But again, that would be the last thing that we would be able to do for our loved ones, and we want them to be celebrated, and we want people to see that we're celebrating them. Fashionably, timing, you know, again, our services usually aren't half an hour or 40 minutes. Our services are long because our services are very, very meaningful. And there's a lot to tell about that particular person during that time. So condensed as it is, you know, sometimes our services are 4 hours. And for me, that's normal. That's a homegoing celebration. Again, this is the last time you'd be able to celebrate somebody's life, your loved one's life. And at the same time, often, you know, that's a time where all family members are together in one particular location. You haven't seen your Auntie Joan or your Uncle Donald in 20 years, and that person that passed away actually reunited the family. Funerals, again, itself, the death of a loved one can either bring people closer together or it can tear them further apart. We have matriarchs and patriarchs in our family that essentially are the glue to our families. And once they're gone, the family just kind of disintegrates, unfortunately. So in terms of celebrating a life, that's a meaningful celebration for our culture. You know, again, in terms of services, once we establish the type of service you wish to have, a traditional service would constitute a viewing. Viewings can be a couple hours, they can be an hour. Everything can be done on the same day or have the service the following day, which is quite common now as well. So we would have the service. So come service time, you know, we have it at a church or have it at the funeral home. Then the next step is where you're going to have the body resting. Is it going to be burial or is it going to be cremation? Again, these are decisions that would have to be made. And some families, they say, no, we have to have a burial. We're not doing any cremation. While other families say, no, we don't want burial. It's just going to be a cremation because we're either going to keep the ashes at home or we're going to bury the ashes in a family plot elsewhere, or we're going to scatter the ashes at a place where it was very, very meaningful for our family, or we don't want the ashes, you get rid of them. So as a professional, again, we have to make that clear that if we're getting rid of them, we're going to scatter somewhere that the family perhaps won't even know, they won't even know when. But again, it'll be at the decision of the family ultimately in terms of what disposition must be done. So let's backtrack and go back to preparations in terms of servicing. What we require as a funeral home in terms of preparation. Clothing. Clothing would be anything that person would have worn normally. So if the person, you know, loved a suit or was wearing a suit to go out, anything that would have been worn. So including suit, undergarments, and yes, some people, they forget undergarments, underwear, bras, you know, socks, sometimes are forgotten because people don't realize that dead people need underwear too. Again, it's not mandatory, but you wouldn't typically have your full dress on or your full suit on without any underwear, gentlemen. So that's one of the things that we commonly suggest to families that you bring in when you're making preparations for your loved one. And what I like as well is a perfume. For me, perfume adds that additional touch. You don't want your loved one smelling like chemicals, which they probably will. So the way that I do my preparations, I add a little bit of perfume to the solution, so it's not smelling as formaldehyde-ish. But also at the same time, when you're seeing your loved one for the last time, you're smelling something fragrant, and that fragrance might trigger a certain memory if you were to ever come across that fragrance again. Again, going back to traditions and cultures, and sometimes, you know, you might be sitting somewhere and you might smell a fragrance and that will trigger that memory. Or you might hear a particular song, as Ruth and Elvis mentioned, that might trigger a memory as well. So these are things that also are helping with the grieving process too. Now, we go back to the end of the completion of the service. We go to the cemetery. So cemetery, you have a couple of options if you wish to be buried. You have the option of being buried in a plot that has extra accommodation, so to speak. So essentially that means that you're going to be buried extra depth. That is also called a companion plot, so that would accommodate a companion. So typically a husband and wife, or a husband or two people. You have the option of being buried in a single depth plot. You have the option of being buried side by side. So sometimes people say, you know what, I've been with that person for so long, I don't want them on top of me. Or somebody might say, you know what, I don't want to be buried with anybody. I came into this world alone and I'm going alone. So give me my own space. Someone might say, you know what, we've been together side by side, you know, during the courses of our lives. So let's share our space side by side. So they might purchase a plot which would have side by side, but share a common plaque, either a flat marker or an upright headstone that would share the family name and then individually each name's there. So that would be burial. A burial plot would constitute of the actual space. It would constitute the opening and closing of the grave. So yes, the cemetery, they physically have to open the grave, which is digging, and then they have to close the grave, which is closing. And it doesn't matter whether or not we choose to close the graves using shovels and placing the earth back into the grave. They're still charging us for the lower and fill, or the opening and closing of the grave. That's all part and parcel of it. In choosing a cemetery plot, you know, whether or not you wish to have, again, a flat marker. The flat marker, typically you're looking down at it when you're on the graveside, laid on the ground, or an upright headstone where you're actually looking, you know, square on. So those are things that you would have to determine, because the way that the cemeteries are situated, you have different gardens that would accommodate strictly flat markers, or you have gardens that would accommodate strictly upright. Very rarely you see both flat and upright in the same garden. And the reason that they keep them separate would be because when they're doing the landscaping and maintaining of the property, it would be a lot easier for them to just go over the grass with their lawn equipment and cut the grass evenly with a flat marker versus going through the garden with you know, tools like a weed whacker to go through each marker individually to maintain and prune the grass around it. So those are a few of the options that would be available. Some of the cemetery options, and specifically, I'll use names, memorial gardens. Any memorial gardens, if you're choosing a plot that has an extra depth, it's mandatory that the first burial be placed in a burial vault. So a burial vault would be an outer container that the actual casket would be placed into to protect the casket, first and foremost, but also to maintain the integrity and the levelness of the land. So you'll notice at times if you're going through a cemetery, and you'll notice that there's the rolling, the sloping, or the sunkenness. And typically that's because the casket essentially has collapsed. Once the casket collapses, the ground shifts downward, and that causing the indentation or the sloping of the levelness of the land. So within memorial gardens, it's mandatory that the first burial be placed in a burial vault. Now with other cemeteries, it's not mandatory, but it is recommended as well, in terms of, again, the levels of protection that a family wish to have. So that would be just a segmented portion of the cemetery. Backtracking to the funeral arrangements, and I went ahead. The components or the elements of the funeral service would be the traditional service, what type of service you would like to have, viewing on the day or the night before the service. But also, most importantly, you get into merchandise, and merchandise would be the caskets. So you have a casket, and when you're choosing a casket is mandatory for a deceased person to be placed in for either burial or cremation. And I'll actually share something with you in a bit that I've done differently for some of the families that we're actually serving. A casket, the caskets, they vary. And the comparison to a casket, I would say, is like purchasing a vehicle. You're purchasing this casket based on appearance, based on its features. Different type of caskets have different type of features. You need to know what your wishes, what your wants, what your likes, your dislikes are. Within our community, a lot of people, they like dark furniture. They like the mahoganies, they like the cherries, they like the walnuts. So those are things that you might be interested in. There's different levels of caskets. You have your protective caskets, you have your non-protective caskets. Metal caskets are deemed protective because they actually protect. They have a built-in sealer whereby once the casket is closed, it's airtight and there's nothing that can penetrate that casket. Caskets, they also have that protection where if it begins to break down, the caskets, they actually heal themselves, and that protection is called a cathodic protection. And a cathodic protection is like if you were to see those old buildings with the roofs of copper on it, you know, they'll oxidize and the copper will now turn green. That green or that rust is a form of protection, and that's the cathodic protection. It's the minerals reacting with each other to basically put a Band-Aid over themselves once they start to break down. So there's some caskets that have that element of preservation to it. So those are things that you would pay for as well. In terms of a wooden casket, you have different types of species. So within the species, there's different types of wood. There's birch wood, there's pine wood, there's maple, there's oak, there's mahogany, there's cherry, there's pecan. All different types of trees, all different types of woods. There's cedar. Within the West Indies, a lot of the caskets were made of cedar. Number one, because they were hardwoods, but they were also a fragrant wood. So those woods were more geared towards coffins or caskets at that time. So here we have an eclectic variety of different caskets that are available to suit the needs of the family. The veneer woods are also quite common as well. And veneer woods, again, like purchasing furniture, you might buy a veneer bedroom set that might cost you $800 for an entire set versus a mahogany set that might cost you, a solid mahogany set that might cost you $8,000. With the veneer caskets, you have that same rich look. as a solid wood casket, but for a fraction of the cost. And the reason being, veneer wood caskets are basically made of what you call an MDF, or a micro density fiberboard. And that wood is basically a compilation of sawdust pressed together, compacted together, and then glued. And then there's a thin sheet of actually wood. And that would actually be the solid wood portion of it. So that solid wood sheet would be actually wrapped around the MDF board to give it that rich look of a solid mahogany casket. A lot of the caskets, some of them, they only have a solid bottom, but still the caskets are all, they all have integrity. They all have the requirements and the necessary standards to conform to what the requirements here are in Ontario as well. So again, depending on how much you want to spend, what you would like your funeral to look like, that would be entirely up to the family and their budgets. So a lot of the families that I deal with, and for those of you who know me, I work within your budget. So you say, Luann, you know, we have $5,000 to work with. What can we get for $5,000? Well, you know what, we can get a casket, we can get a service, put the service together, and it'll still look beautiful. If you want to upgrade it a little bit more, then we can do an upgrade, and that's entirely up to you, but I work within your budget. For those families that don't have the means to pay for a funeral, and again, I like to be straight and upfront with families. I ask them the requirements or the needs of their family in terms of their finances. What would you like? How much do you wish to spend on the funeral, or what's your budget? And if they say, Luann, you know what? We don't have a budget, in the sense that we never planned for this, and truly we don't have the means to pay for a funeral. And you know what? There's no shame in that. That's fine, because the government has provisions whereby if you do not have the means to pay for a funeral, the government will pay for a funeral for you. And within our funeral services that we do, typically, it doesn't matter how much you pay for a funeral or how much you don't pay for a funeral. Equivocally, you're still receiving that same service, and it doesn't matter how much you're spending. Everybody will be treated in a caring and dignified manner and sent away the best way possible. So that's generally the essentials of what you would be looking at in terms of services. On average here in Ontario, or not going to say Ontario specifically, but locally here within the GTA, a funeral service can cost as low as, and when I refer to funeral service, it would be our portion of the funeral. So getting the body from the hospital to the graveside, or to the church, and then from the church to the graveside. So our professional services, minimally, I would say a traditional funeral would start out at about $7,500. That $7,500 would give you the services of the funeral home, the casket, perhaps some flowers, and maybe some stationery as well in terms of programs. So that would be the lowest. On an average end, you'll probably be looking at about $13,000, including tax, $13,000 including tax, and an average style casket. Additionally, on top of our funeral service costs, you would have the cost for the burial property, or the cremation. Cremation, actual figure right now for a cremation is $707 with us here. Again, burials, they range anywhere from, I would say, $4,200 up to perhaps maybe $7,000 for an average plot. There are cemeteries that are selling one plot today at about $12,000. And then additionally, you have your opening and closing and such, and your headstones or whatnot on top of that cost. But based on my referrals and my recommendations, you should be spending no more than, I would say, $4,400 for your burial plot. Headstones can be done at a later date. Some funeral or some cemeteries, they would put everything as a package for you. And it could go both ways. They put everything as a package for you so that they ensure that they're getting and they're retaining your business and they're making the sale. But you have no obligation to purchase anything other than the essentials, which would be the plot and the opening and closing for that particular space. So in anywhere that you go, including funeral homes as well, you may be in front of a salesperson that typically is thinking about, okay, we want to sell the packages. So, you know, this is the package. The package cost $15,000, Mr. Smith. Or Mr. Walters is right in front of me right now. So Mr. Walters, your funeral package will cost you $15,000. How do you wish to pay for that package? And they'll wait. And they'll wait. And they'll wait. And the pressure is on you because you need to make that decision right away. If you don't have a decision made, then unfortunately, there's nothing going to happen. You know, mom or dad is still going to be at the hospital until you make that decision and until you put a deposit down, because they're not doing anything without a deposit. We do things a little bit differently here, whereby we don't request or demand a deposit on the time of the arrangements. If you want to bring a deposit down when you're bringing the clothing in or when we're picking up the clothing, that's fine. But everything must be paid prior to the funeral. And typically the reason that we've implemented that is because some families, they haven't paid their bill. And then it's difficult to go back to families asking them, we provided you with a service, you still have an outstanding bill. Some funeral homes, again, they're not doing anything until they have 75% of that contract before they move forward. Some cemeteries, they're not doing anything until the full contract is paid off 72 hours prior to that burial taking place. So either way, they know that they're going to get paid and they don't have to come back, you know, demanding payment after the fact. So that's a case of we call it an at-need situation, meaning that the need is present and we're providing that service to you. But in terms of preparing ahead, you have the means to get everything that you absolutely want, get it documented on paper, and be able to budget for it. So as an example, you can span your prearranged funeral, prearranged cemetery. For a cemetery, I believe the minimum time frame would be 60 months, which would be 5 years. For a funeral, depending upon your age, you can extend it for up to 25 years. So 25-year payment would give you the least amount monthly. I believe you're paying like $25 a month towards your funeral expenses. Drop in the bucket for some. But some people, they don't want to expand it or extend it for that long period of time, because in actual fact, if you do the calculations of the number of payments that you're paying per month, each month has, each year has 12 months. So you're multiplying 12 months by 25 at whatever the premium is. That would be the amount of money you'd be paying in at the end of the 25-year time frame. So if you look at what you're paying today for a $10,000 funeral, perhaps 25 years from now, that funeral is going to be $30,000. So with pre-arrangements, again, you have the option of prepaying it monthly. You can prepay it quarterly. You can prepay it annually. You can just do a lump sum if you have the funds available and you just want to forget about it. It's done according to your budget and according to your time frame as well. Now, as an example, people say, well, what happens if I give you this money, I give you $10,000, and the funeral cost 10 years from now is $20,000? Well, what happens with the money that you've entrusted to the funeral home? It actually goes into a trust as outside of the general funeral home account. So if you're giving me money to prepay your funeral, I have no access to those funds. I have to put those into a trust. So within that trust, the trusts that are held are insurance-based companies. And with insurances, essentially, they're basically playing with your money. So they're giving you interest on top of your money. 10 years from now, that interest is going to help offset the cost of the funeral. So 10 years, and Mr. Walters, I'm picking on you. I don't know who you are because I don't see your face. But Mr. Walters has passed away, 10 years from now. And I get a call from Mrs. Walters, perhaps, and she says, Luann, we prearranged with you. My husband prearranged with you 10 years ago. Unfortunately, he has passed. Where do we go from here? Basically, I would have everything documented already. And I'll call up the holding company and say that Mr. Walters has passed away. We need to get those funds back into the funeral home. What is the cash out value? Cash out value would be the money that we would be receiving at current date. So 10 years, his funds, they haven't done particularly well, but he may have $18,000 in there. And again, the funeral cost is $20,000. So by law, we can't go back to the family and say, you know what, well, the insurance didn't do as well as we thought it would, and you owe us $2,000. We promised to look after and guarantee that arrangement. So the funeral home would have to take that $200 or $2,000 as a shortfall. On the reverse side, let's say 10 years from now, we've lowered our costs for whatever reason, and you have $20,000 in there, but the funeral costs only $18,000. Again, bylaw states that we can't hold on to that excess, so that excess fund must be returned back to the family, unless the family wish to purchase other things. They'll say, you know what, well, there was one arrangement in there. We'd like to have 2 more, 3 more, because now there's grandchildren and there's great-grandchildren. So we want our grandchildren to be reflective in those floral arrangements. So whatever the changes are, we will credit or apply those costs to the credit that we already have. So if there's going to be something left over, again, it goes to the family. If there's not going to have anything be left over, then we just call it even because we fulfilled what the contractual amounts were. The other question is, let's say we have prearranged here, but decide to move out of the country or go on holiday, and a death occurs in the country that we're visiting, or we typically live in, certain times of the year, and we don't want to come back home. What happens? Again, those funds are held in trust, and again, we don't have access to those funds. So what would happen in that case would be either those funds would be returned to the funeral home in wherever the death has occurred, or those funds would be returned to the estate. So again, we can't hold on to any of those funds. So either way, your funds are secure. Let's say that there's a prearrangement. Again, Mr. Walters, I'm picking on you. Mr. Walters has prearranged. And, Mr. Walters technically on paper is now 99 years old. We haven't heard from him. We don't know whether or not he's alive. We don't know whether or not he's moved to another country. We don't know. Nobody knows. Those funds are still sitting there accruing interest. Essentially, we'll get a notification from the holding company to do like a verification as to see where that person is. If we have no record of him, we would have to go through like a form of registry to check and see whether or not he is deceased. and check process of elimination in terms of contacting next of kin who we had documented on paper to see what happened to Mr. Walters. Is he still alive? Because these funds have been sitting there for a number of years. And again, based on his age, we just want to make sure that he is still alive rather than holding the money indefinitely. So again, those protections are still there. Other question would be, well, let's say I decide to prearrange with you and your funeral home goes bankrupt. Again, your money is protected. In the case of us personally, the funeral home that I have now was once called Balmoral Funeral Home. The funeral home didn't go bankrupt, but the owner had passed away. So that business was dissolved. But a lot of my prearrangements that I had prearranged earlier, they were held under the umbrella of the Balmoral Funeral Home. So what happened was at that time, everyone that had a prearrangement, they had to be notified to say Balmoral Funeral Home has been closed or will be closing. You have the option of cashing out your money and keeping it, or you have the option of reassigning it to another funeral home. Now, in reassigning it to another funeral home, that funeral home has to be receptive to taking those arrangements on at the cost that Balmoral Funeral Home would have provided those services to you. Again, sometimes the cost might be significantly lower, and sometimes funeral homes might say, well, that's, just covering the cost of our service charge. You're going to need to pay for X, Y, Z to have a full pre-arrangement. Or yes, gladly, we will take that arrangement. Very rarely a funeral home would refuse the business as well. So at that time, again, there's a few options, and I'm sure that there are many questions that need to be asked, or things that you might have heard but you're unsure about. So I guess this is a time where we'd be willing to do a question, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So thank you for listening to me. Ask your questions.
Thank you, Luann.
You're welcome.
Before we go into the question and answering period, we're just going to, at this point in time, get a call upon Georgia again to give you a thank you for your presentation before and following Georgia's thank you. Isaac Brothers doing a special music for us, and then we'll go into Q&A. Georgia.
Oh, hi, Luann. It's Georgia.
Hey, Georgia.
Hi. Just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was well informative. I know that debt is inevitable, and no one wants to plan for their future.
Sorry, I think we lost Georgia there.
It is something that we should all do because it alleviates a lot of stress. In place, you should start putting something in place for when you die, because especially if you have children, you don't want them to go through that stress. And I have already have my plans in place, and I know my husband was saying, I don't want to do that. I don't want to plan for my funeral, but it was so easy, to get the plan, and you do it on a monthly basis. I'm sure that will take away a lot of stress when the time comes. So I would strongly encourage everyone to start doing something, now. And I've known you personally for quite a while, and I would strongly recommend your service to anyone who would like to start putting something in place. So thanks again, Luann, and I look forward to continue working with you, and may God continue to prosper you and to prosper your business. Thank you so much.
You. And one of the things too, before I forget, in terms of membership has its benefits. Being a part of the conference being one of my biggest supporters, I've extended a 20% discount on our service charge as well for people that either wish to prearrange or have at-need services as well. And that would be my contribution to the conference as well, and to the families that are entrusted into my care. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Luann. Thank you for that. That's very, very generous of you. Thank you. So we'll call on the Isaacs brothers now to do a special music, and then we go into our Q&A. Guys, if you can hear me, I believe your volume is off. We can't hear you. We can see you playing, but your volume is off. Thank you very much to the Isaac brothers for that rendition. So folks, listen, I know that we've spent the past almost 2.5 hours now just going through, some very, very informative information has been passed our way. And I know for some of us, we may not have had a lunch. Listen, you have my permission to eat on camera if you so choose, Luann and Brother Elvis and Ruth. I know, but I really want to thank you all for staying the course with us. So we're going to go into a brief Q&A period. So for our panel, we'll have, of course, the expertise of Luann as well as Elvis and Ruth. I've also asked Sister Lightbody and Brother Simon to join me as part of this panel, because they would have suffered relative recent loss. So I'm going to start off by posing this question, and then I'll pose a question to Brother Simon, and if anyone else wants to join in, you're free to do so. So, Brother Simon, it's been, I guess, it's just over a year since Sister Simon passed. Brother Simon.
Tomorrow makes a year, Brother Dave.
I thought so. Yes, remember it was towards the end of towards mid-August. Tomorrow will be a year. Wow, a year already.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brother Simon, tell me then, was there a surprise or a shock that you came across during the planning of Sister Simon's funeral arrangements?
Shock.
And by this, I know I'm not talking about the actual loss. By this, I'm talking about whether you, and I don't know personally you want to get at this point in time, but whether it be in terms of the actual planning of as some of the stages that Luann mentioned, or some of the stuff that was covered by Elvis and Ruth. But share with us.
Yeah, from a planning standpoint, some years ago, I discussed with someone from church, I can't remember who it was, and when they suggested planning ahead, I was most upset. But like Luann said in her presentation, I went and did my biblical research and realized it was a biblical practice. So believe it or not, in 1995, we started the process. And so in terms of planning for funerals, we had that locked up a few years after 1995. We finished paying for it in 2002 also. So we took 7 years to complete the process. So from that standpoint, I did not have to worry too much about that when my wife passed.
Okay. But is there any other shock besides the financial aspect and the preparedness for that? Is there anything else during the actual planning of, let's say, for example, when you had to visit with with Luann? Was there anything that you didn't want to deal with, or you found shocking?
Well, no, I think I was prepared. Given the fact that a few things, my wife was sick for 5.5 years. Thank God, her health only deteriorated in the last 2 months or so. So, when we recognized what was happening and what we were told, it was just a matter of accepting what was before us. And when it actually happened, I think the very next day I called Luann. Oh no, the same night I called Luann after she was pronounced dead at about, I think it was about 12:06 on the 16th of August. So I called Luann that night and started the process. So I think from a planning standpoint, the family was quite ready, given the signs that we had before and what we were told and so forth by the medical professionals. Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Simon. Sorry, and I should let you know that Sister Lawrence will also be joining in this segment as well for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel at this time, if you can electronically raise your hands, we'll acknowledge you. At this point, I believe Sister Lawrence have a question.
I want to know that when a patient is sick and die at home, isn't the police called before the body can be released to the funeral home?
I believe that would be a question for Luann. You have to unmute for us, Luann.
Sorry. Hi, Sister Lawrence. Good question. If the person was sick and dying at home, they would have been under the care of an attending physician or through a community care nurse. So they would be aware that it would be a planned death at home, meaning that the emergency services and whoever would have already known that the death was going to be occurring at home, and there would be no need for police to come and investigate the passing of that person's person. So in the event of a planned death at home, there's usually a form, it's a DNR, do not resuscitate form perhaps, or again, the planned death at home form, that the nurses would be notified by the family that in the event a death occur, they're to call the local funeral home. So in the event something happens, you know that you're coming to Covenant Funeral Home. So come that time of the passing, the funeral home would be called. And sometimes the medical would be available at that time, or in often cases of a planned death where, let's say it were overnight, we would still do the removal of the body and bring the body back into our care, but then arrange to meet with the doctor who typically would have signed off on the death certificate to pick up the death certificate from either the doctor's office or have the doctor drop it off here at the funeral home. So to answer your question, no, if a death were anticipated to happen at home, there's no need for the police to be there because that death in fact was anticipated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question for Ruth and Elvis at this point in time. So Ruth and Elvis, in your experience while helping people, counseling people as they go through losses, what are some of the, if you can share with us some of the things that are the most insensitive things that your counselors might have said that someone said to them in their time of grief? And the reason why I'm asking you that question is just so that it can help us to prepare ourselves when we are asking or when we're attempting to grieve or to comfort someone during their period of grief, that we don't repeat those things.
Well, I think that we have, we highlighted some of it, and, you know, is expressing to them that you know how, you know, they are feeling. Also, trying to rescue how they feel. It is okay for them to flow and express it in the way that they want to, you know, grieve. And we know that there are no right or wrong ways there. Another big area is the level of confidentiality. Sometimes people might disclose to you something that they hold dear in their heart, but they've not given you permission to go and disclose it. And the place where you hear confidentiality broken is a prayer meeting. Go to Wednesday prayer meetings. This is where people disclose a whole lot of confidentiality, that let's pray for sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so. They just told me this diagnosis, or maybe they just passed, and guess what? They want to relocate, but they don't want the church community to hear. So confidentiality is a very big one that we should all try and adhere to when they disclose. And also, trying not to give them advice. You know, it may be a very good advice, but at the wrong time. It may be a very good advice, but for not that person. It may be a very good advice, but at that time, they might look at you as a guru. But to help them explore how they're feeling, what is it that they are processing. So our everyday thing that we do that is not helpful, we should try and avoid them. But know that your presence alone is therapeutic and is healing. And sometimes we feel that we should say something to rescue the silence, but even being there in silence to listen to them in silence, go deep for them in terms of their healing process. And, you know, we want to congratulate Brother Simon, what you said about planning ahead of time. Well done. We commend you and your family. And all of us have got a lot to learn from you. And also to thank our sister from England. Ruth has said earlier before you came on that one thing she's missing a lot is the fish and chips. We're sure that you are also missing your fish also. And we very much like what you had expressed about pre-planning. It is biblical because when God sent Isaiah to the king Hezekiah, he told him, put your house in order because you will die. How many times are we intentional putting our lives and the house in order? So, Brother Dave, thank you for this question. We should not minimize the notion of being there in person, our presence, and not to feel that we want to rescue the situation. Sometimes it is our own uncomfortableness that we want to rescue the situation. I'm sure my sugar dumpling have got something to add.
Thank you so much, Elvis, for that. And, you know, the narrative of the story of Job, in Job chapter 2, in verse 11 to 13, it says, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off, and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spoke a word unto him. And in that story, what that told me is that the best time that Job's 3 friends spent with him was the 7 days and 7 nights when they didn't say a word. Because if we continue to read that story, we know that some of the things that they said was very, very hurtful. And so I thank you for answering that question, Elvis. Just our presence alone can make a difference. We don't always have to try to say something, because that can be very hurtful. So, question for you again, Luann. You mentioned in your presentation that 30 days, that you will keep a body for as long as 30 days. Is there any legislation regarding the length of time that a body can be held, or should be held before burial?
Actually, typically we would normally, again, based on culture, we would normally keep our dissidents here for, I would say 2-3 weeks tops, because that gives a chance for families to notify their loved ones, for people to come in to participate in the funeral. But the wrench in the spoke was that COVID happened. So in terms of COVID-19, the pandemic, there are a lot of things that have changed. At one point, we're just getting back into normalcy again. But at one point, we weren't allowed to hold anybody. The death occurred within, I would say within the week, we had to have that burial or cremation. So we weren't holding anybody because we were actually, the funeral homes in a whole, they were getting random inspections. As an example, I received a call at 10 o'clock in the morning to say, we need access to your building at 2 o'clock. Make sure somebody's there, make sure it's opened. I was there, I didn't have any services on that day. But basically what happened is they're coming in and they're going directly to your preparation room to see and account for how many people are in that preparation room and check and see the dates that the arrangements came in, check the medicals to ensure that nobody's being kept there longer than they were supposed to be. So again, now we're kind of getting back into whatever phases, you know, things are kind of getting back into normal. And, you know, if we have to have a funeral within the next 2 weeks now, that's fine. But in terms of legislation doesn't state or specify how long we can keep anybody here. Currently, we have somebody in our care, and it's been over, I think it's over 2 years. So again, those things are based upon, you know, dynamics. Unfortunately, with this particular arrangement, it's in the courts right now, and we're at a standstill. So we can't do anything at this point in time. We generally don't charge for storage up to 2 weeks. Anything after 2 weeks, there is a charge, and each funeral home charges accordingly.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Luann. Now, you mentioned also in your presentation that in the event that family can't take care of the final arrangement for a loved one, that government will pay for the funeral for you. Do you know what that amount is that the government will actually pay? Because I think the audience would like to know that.
Well, in terms of what the government pays, there's no contract per se. Like, you would get a value of either a type A or a type B funeral. Type A funeral would be, and sometimes I get them confused, but type A, as an example, would be an immediate cremation. An immediate cremation is basically just picking up and delivering to the crematorium, or having a traditional service whereby you'd have 2 hours of visitation and 2 hours of service. So it's a 4-hour process. So contractually, there is no contract with the family. The contract is with the government. And generally, there is no top up. Let's say the government gives $5,000. You know, you go to the government for assistance, they give $5,000, and then you decide that you want to give an additional $5,000. With the government, it's all or nothing. So there's no credit. And then in terms of stipulations of what is received, again, it's either a type A or type B, and type A would be consistent of, you know, this particular casket, or type B would be consistent of this particular casket.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have a question for the audience? Sister Lawrence?
One quick question. Just curious, in terms of information available, is all that you've presented here today, is any of that available on your website?
Was that for me?
Yes.
Sorry. There's some information on there, but again, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call in, and I'll put my contact information in the chat room as well. I don't put all the information on the website because information is forever changing as well.
I want to ask.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to ask, Agnes, if in her experience with death of her loved ones, did anybody say anything to her at any time that alleviate the pain she felt? Whatever they say, anybody say anything to her that help her deal with the stress of the death?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As you know, this year has been a very stressful one for me, but thank God He brought me through the rough waters of life. I lost my sister earlier this year, and shortly after, another sibling. I also lost my brother as well. And in between, my husband was sick and was diagnosed with cancer and so forth. So it has been very stressful. There were times when I felt low, depressed, and pretty much was helpless during the situation. So going through all of that, after
Just lost you guys there. No volume from the light bodies. You're muted.
I'm unmuting.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, as I said, having lost two of my siblings earlier this year, coupled with the fact that my husband was sick and diagnosed with cancer, had surgery and everything, it has been very, very stressful. And yes, we went through prayer. Yes, we went through counseling. Yes, we went through all the phone calls that we got, you know, everything was in place. But somehow you feel so angered of what is taking place in your life at that time. And I remember one particular day in my low moment, I remember Matthew 5 and verse 4. The text in the Bible said, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." And the very day that that text was brought to my mind, I got a phone call from a very dear friend of ours, Sister Mills, and she was there, you know, giving me some very encouraging words. And she also quoted that same scripture, Matthew 5 and verse 4. And I held on to that text up until now to know that even in the storm, God is there with us and with us. And so the phone call, yes, but that particular text that she called me and encouraged me with really proved as a source of strength and a double blessing for a time when I really needed it most. Yes, I had counseling from my workplace, of course. Yes, the doctor was there to support. Yes, the church family was calling and praying. But that particular day when I got the call from Sister Mills, reminded me that blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And I realized that God is with us, even in the storms that we're experiencing, you know, from day to day. And that was my encouraging words from her.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question for Luann. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
So the question is, I noticed that she didn't talk about the mausoleum. Is there a difference in cost if you bury your loved one in a mausoleum versus underground?
Sorry about that. Yes, mausoleum, that's another form of disposition, and that would be called an entombment. So the entombment costs, and basically what you would be paying for would be the structure itself. You'd be paying for the crypts. So the crypts, they range, I would say on average from $10,000 to probably $50,000 to be buried in the wall. And essentially, when you're choosing the crypt, the lower, so you have different levels. So you have your floor level, mid-level, you have your eye level. The eye level would be considered premium because it's actually eye and you can actually touch it. The higher you go to ceiling level, that would be less expensive. So I've had sold at the time when I was working for the cemetery, eye level, let's say at $7,000, and it's cheaper than floor level. So a lot of our families that were interested in purchasing in the mausoleum, they would go eye level. And my selling feature was that it's cheaper, but you're closer to God.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Another question that I have. Well, let me share my one of the most insensitive things that was said to me. And we talk about cultural here. When my mom passed away, the funeral took place back in Guyana. And essentially we're from the countryside. And so the viewing in culturally in Guyana would be done same day. And generally what they will do, they'll bring the body to the home, the viewing takes place at the home, then it goes to the church, and then for final burial. And I remember the night before the burial, so, you know, there's the wake and people are coming over from all over and, you know, to share in your grief. And there's a friend that I grew up with. So this was just maybe about 4 o'clock in the morning. The place was about empty now because most people had left and gone home. And so just a few stragglers were left, you know, hanging around the house. Some guys were playing dominoes and, you know, just doing whatever, socializing with the family. And so I came downstairs and I was just cleaning up some of the mess from you know, what was left with the huge crowd that we had. And while cleaning up, some thought about my mom came back to memory. And so I just broke down and I started crying, you know, like tears, like physically sobbing. And there was a guy that walked up to me and he said to me, he said, Dave, come man, you can't do that, man. Why are you embarrassing yourself? So you can't cry like that. And as he said that, I just burst out laughing because I was so surprised to hear him say, like, vocalize something like that. And, you know, it brought humor to and so in the midst of my grief, I started laughing. And to this day, I'm sharing it with you now, but like, I didn't really tell many people what he said to me that brought out that laughter. And for me, it was more a laughter of laughing at his ignorance, you know, that men are not supposed to cry when you grieve. And I know Elvis and Ruth mentioned that in their presentation as well. So I wanted to share that with us, that sometimes people will say the most insensitive things in your moment of grief. Don't hold it against them. Just, you know, you may not be able to do like what I did in terms of laughing it out, but essentially just remember that they mean well, because sometimes coming out of that, you can essentially become so angered by that person that as you go through your stages of grief, you don't even want to see that person anymore. You don't want to talk to that person, and then that person essentially becomes your enemy and you don't know why. You know, so it's important for us to be very thoughtful in terms of what we're saying. So on that note,
Hi, Dave.
Dave. Hello.
Hi.
Lightbody here. I just wanted to, you know, incidentally last night when we had devotion, we're looking at a part of the adult lesson that says when you say something, you should know. You should know when to say something, what to say, and how you say. And we kind of reflected on appropriate times, and which included time of grief. And we concluded, for example, that it's best to sometimes just give the person a hug. Don't say anything, right? Just based on what you just said. The other thing is, a few weeks ago in our Sabbath school class, we're talking about the state of the dead. Brother Simon will remember this. And I brought up the fact that part of preparation is to make sure your spouse know, for example, passwords, bank account issues. Well, generally you should be sharing accounts, but there are certain things that there are outstanding, let's say, debts with anybody. All of that should be brought to the table so nobody is in the dark when that comes. So I think preparation, we should be intentional about it to make sure that we cover all these things so we do not have hidden things that come to surprise people when they're grieving.
During that like body, I believe Georgia has her hands up. So Georgia?
No, I would just, I just wanted to, I had a question for Luann, and I also wanted to share something. And in light of what Brother Lightbody just said, I have a folder that I put all my stuff in. Like I have all my insurance paper, my bank account, my just about everything that I have, my investments and stuff like that, that I put aside for my daughter, because my husband, like he knows, but Licia would be more able to take care of stuff. So I think that people should, as you said, be intentional and have all these things in place so that you're not fidgeting around. Your loved one is not fidgeting around when you pass away suddenly, for all these things. And the other thing that I would like to share, as you said, somebody said something insensitive to you when your mom passed away. I had a similar experience when my son passed away, that it was my best friend's mother. And, she said, God knows best when my son passed away. And I just couldn't understand why she would say something like that to me at the time, and I really hated her for a period. And I just didn't want to see her, didn't want to talk to her or anything, because I was grieving. And for her to say something like that to me. So then I kind of confronted her after a while, and I said, why would you say something like that? And she said, the reason why she said that is because I never know what the Lord was saving me from, because my son could grow up and be a criminal, or he could grow up to be, all kind of stuff, she said to me. And I still just didn't get it, why somebody should say something like that to you. And she probably meant well, but it was still very hurtful, so I people should definitely know what to say and when to say certain things.
But just say nothing, right?
Or just don't say anything, Yeah. So sometimes, just hugging a person is the best way of communicating that you feel their loss or whatever. And the question I have for Luann is, when somebody dies, like tragically, is there is there a way that how does the like the government, what role do they play in that, and how do you go about
that? If somebody passes tragically through an act of violence or
Yes.
accident, so if somebody passes as a result of an act of violence, be it murder, the government has a division specifically to assist families with that, and that is called victim services. So victim services is basically an agency that helps families with assistance in paying for a funeral. So in this case, victim services, they will allot $5,000 towards arrangements. With that $5,000, that would go directly to the funeral home and offset the cost of any funeral expenses that the families may incur. It conflicts, let's say if that person or that family was on social assistance, it would be conflicting with social assistance. So you would either be eligible for victim services or eligible for social service funded funeral.
If I can also add to that, Georgia, in addition to the $5,000 to help with funeral expenses, they also will add $1,000 for counseling for each family member. So if it's a case of, like Luann said, if it's violence, if it's criminal, if it's domestic violence, things like that, they will, not automatically, but you have to report it, and it needs, when it's reported and it's a police case. Sometimes if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. It is there, so people should be aware of it. And also, depending on which city or province you're in, if you're looking for a Christian counselor, you can ask them, or if you know any Christian counselors like Elpizo Counseling Services, you can let them know, because we're registered with Peel and with Holton, and they will refer that individual to that counseling service. And like I said, they will pay up to $1,000 per family member for counseling. I also wanted to.
So for someone who doesn't know that the service exists, like how do you go about it? Say for instance, I have someone pass away now. Where do I tell them to go to get this assistance?
So for us specifically, those are one of the questions that I ask families in the case where, let's say it was a younger person and they died unnaturally. I usually ask them if they have contacted victim services, because victim services will help offset the costs of the arrangements. Again, depending upon the funeral home, with victim services and with any government agency, there's always a delay in receiving those funds. So some funeral homes, they're not as forthcoming because they know that they're not going to get those funds right away. So basically they would have to perform the services and then have an outstanding balance. But we work well with victim services. We work well with Toronto Social Services, and we also work well with public trustee as well. And again, with public trustee, we would have to do, we don't have to, but we do the complete service and then wait for reimbursement of funds up to 3 months as well. So again, it's at the discretion of the person that you're sitting in front of, and it would be the funeral professional's duty to provide you with, the proper information in assisting the family through the process as well.
So also, and similarly, you will go for counseling, it's the same process. You will go to victim support services and they will direct you accordingly. But again, you have to, Sometimes they don't direct you, so you have to ask the questions, and unfortunately you have to do the research sometimes yourselves. But also, if you are working in an organization, let's say the death occurred or injury occurred at your workplace, WSIB, and I was trying to remember what the acronym stood for, but they also would pay for some services for you. WSIB for workplace, injury or death, they will pay for support as well.
And they also pay for funeral expenses as well, because there was an instance where a family, the gentleman passed while he was in transit. So he was typically working and going home in the company vehicle. And we were able to narrow it down because they didn't have the means, they didn't qualify for social assistance. And victim services ended up paying for everything, including sending him back home to Jamaica. Sorry, not victim services, WSIB. Yeah, Workmen's Safety Insurance Bureau, I believe is the acronym stands for.
And the thing is that a lot of people have benefits at work that they don't realize. So you need to find out what your extended benefit is for, because you're contributing to it. So other than your prescriptions or maybe going to, I don't know, physiotherapy, look into your extended health benefits and see what it covers. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. So a lot of it is self-education. Otherwise, the company, I guess the company benefits when you don't use it. So a lot of learning, it's important, it's good. I quickly wanted to say, because it's been said a couple of times about hugging, that, you know, in situations, please ask, may I give you a hug? Let's not automatically assume that everybody loves to be hugged or wants to be touched, especially during those stressful moments. Touch can also be a trigger or could be, you know, it could send a bad thing. So just as we like to be respectful, also ask, may I give you a hug? Is it okay if I touch, you know, those things? So just wanted to add that quickly.
And also expressing the notion of, you know, pre-planning and also having conversation. I think that our elder alluded to it when he said, sometimes a loved one or a spouse passing away, you don't even know the password to the bank account or even, you know, paying bills, and you are lost in the wilderness. It is so true. And this is something that we also cover when we do premarital counseling, or we even do marriage counseling, that we talk about these things. And we also bring the subject out that if one dies, what happens? Do you give permission for the other one to also? Because sometimes when these important discussions are not had, and one person, you know, a spouse dies, say for example, the other one tends to hold on guilt that, oh my goodness, am I going to be dishonored or disloyal, or am I going to, you know, be unfair on my wife or husband moving on to get married because they never had that discussion? So these are all part of the process of, you know, talking about anything that comes in that would be helpful. We encourage that you have this important discussion.
And I think I want to touch about hugging too, and personal contact as well with the COVID pandemic. You know, unfortunately, as it is, we've become cold in a sense, like we can't show emotion as we would want to, although the intent is there to hug and to touch. Is it a good thing right now? I don't think it would be right now, because again, especially within our industry too, families that are grieving, their emotions, their immune systems are depleted right now. So again, in terms of, you know, contact, passing viruses, and people with weak immune systems are more susceptible. So I think at this time we have to be mindful and keep contact at a minimum in terms of hugging.
Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Sister Raymond.
Yes. Area that I wanted to ask Elvis and Ruth, in that when we talk about grief, sometimes we forget the children grieve as well. And I think we need to put more emphasis on getting counseling for the children, because a lot of times we just talk about the mother and father losing the child. We forget that the child, any surviving child, they've lost a sibling. And a lot of times these are not emphasized. So I just wondered if you could discuss that a little bit.
That is correct, Sister Raymond. I think we mentioned it earlier on in our presentation that it's just equally as important that we allow the children to grieve and create a safe space to involve the children, not only in the rituals and the preparation, but also allowing them to talk about how they feel. But again, children are very sensitive as well. And so when they realize or see that talking about speaking on the subject matter or speaking about a loved one that's passed away, and you flinch as an adult, or you kind of show an emotional reaction that is a bit negative, they shut down. But yes, for sure, children must be engaged and should be engaged. And sometimes they don't want to talk to their parents. They don't want to talk to their family members. So this is where, as adults, we want to send them to a therapist or to somebody else who will be neutral and non-judgmental, and allow them to explore and share, and and again, remembering that children are not as verbal as adults. And so this is where we use play therapy to engage the children, and they honestly writing, drawing, and asking them, even parents can do the same. Draw out your feelings or put something down. You'll notice a lot children will, really just in their aggression of drawing or scribbling or painting, that in itself tells a lot. So we do use play therapy in that sense for children. But yes, I concur that children definitely need to be engaged. And also it's a cultural thing. I know for, in our culture, children, sometimes they're not even allowed at funerals. They're not allowed to say their goodbyes because we want to protect them. The idea or the notion behind it is that we want to protect the children. But as adults, or in our practice, we get adults coming in saying, when I was a child, so-and-so passed away and I wasn't able to grieve, or I wasn't part of it, or I wasn't allowed to be there, and I'm still hurting from it. So from a psychological, mental health, emotional perspective, we encourage that children be given that safe space and safe environment to grieve in their own way and not to be rushed as well.
Absolutely. And also it is very important that we explain to them what death really means. We should not say dad, mom, or grandma, granddad, they are in heaven. No, they are not in heaven. And because when children, you express these type of answers to them, they sometimes will be standing in the window wishing that they will come back home, but they're not coming back home. And we've had a lot of, kids that will come to, therapy, and they will say, I know because mom told me that dad had traveled and dad will come. So every day I look in the window, looking forward for dad coming home. And sometimes how we express or how we explain things, we don't know how it goes a long way also impacting them. Talking about grief, we are not only limiting ourselves to death, but when in our presentation earlier on, we had mentioned about the primary one being death and also the secondary one being something else, especially children. one big area is when mom and dad, they're going through separation or divorce. They don't include children. They don't explain the process and how things will be like children. Know that dad or mom would have taken 5, 6, 2, 10 years to really process and come into terms that it is now time, it's not working out, we're going our separate way. But children are dropped into it and they are told, don't worry, you have dad, you have mom, you will be looked after. But how are they feeling? I have permission from my client who came to therapy. He was 65 years old. He came and his presenting problem was that his parents that are in their 80s are going through divorce and it has affected him big time. So my, thinking was that if a 65-year-old will be affected and broken into pieces, how much more children? But sometimes we minimize their feeling and they start going through emotional disturbance that when they go to school, they start acting out or start having this depressive, and yes, depression also happens to children too, just like it happens to adults. So thank you, Sister Raymond. It was very important, point.
Thank you. I have one final question for Luann and Elvis and Ruth. And my question is, we may have all suffered loss. Death is not, death is essentially inevitable, that we've learned, and each one of us may have suffered a loss. Might be close, might be far. My question is, let's talk in terms of a loved one or a sibling who, let's say someone have 4 siblings, and the siblings are scattered all over the universe or the world, I should say, right? But then there's one sibling who is close to the person that passes away, or physically close. So the other ones are farther away. And that final arrangement is being made by the sibling who's close. And sometimes in consultation with the others. But can you speak to the coping mechanism for that individual who is dealing with the final loss, for example, as opposed to the others who are farther away? And if you've had maybe any counseling session or any family that you'd have dealt with that had instances like that, and what you find out, what are some of the dynamics that you have to work through to help the family to heal in those circumstances?
I'll answer a portion of that question. In terms of siblings that might have been away from their family members or their loved ones that have passed, the strain is always going to be there, in a sense that that person that's away may have missed out on experiencing that death, be it because they were away on work, or perhaps they may have been just estranged from the family. At the same time, the children over here might be feeling the animosity because they were the ones that had to take that burden and take care of that loved one and look or finance things without the support and help of perhaps other siblings. But at the same time, there may be guilt on both sides. The decisions that should be made in terms of the final arrangement should be done in unison. And I always tell families, if there's somebody that's estranged, at least offer that olive branch and give them the opportunity to participate or contribute, either through participation in the service or writing a eulogy or writing a tribute, or financially, whatever else, could be helpful during that time. But, at least you've given them the opportunity to contribute. If they choose not to contribute, then at least you've done your part. And I think any contribution towards a funeral is a step in helping with the grief journey as well, because you have actually contributed, you have participated or had some input in the closure of that chapter of that person's life?
I totally agree with Luann. I don't think that there's an easy way to deal with estranged family members or family members that live away. It's, again, preparation is very important. Sometimes the person who is closer or who's physically present with the loved one that passed away, they would have shared with them their plans. Or what they want to see happen, and maybe the other family members are not aware of it. So again, like Luann said, it's about collaboration. It's about talking, trying to bring everybody in together, because they also will go through a plethora of different emotions, from guilt to anger to sadness to depression to, they will go through all that range of emotions. So just being intentional and trying to bring everybody together. Situations like this can either bring people together or draw people apart. So it's just being aware of it, being aware of your own personal emotions and how you deal with it, and setting some clear and healthy boundaries. But in terms of support, I think it's similar to everybody else in just getting the support, getting the therapy, getting the counseling, speaking to somebody that can help you process. I wanted to add something that we haven't mentioned that came to mind is suicide. When a family member or a friend suicides, especially in our Christian world, sometimes we don't want to grieve for that person, or we're too angry, or we don't even want to tell people, yes, my family member suicided or killed themselves. This is an area that it's difficult, it's very sensitive, and we also encourage you that let's not kind of cover it, because it comes with some shame as well, and embarrassment, all sorts of things. So let's be open, like we've said earlier, with everything, with grief. It is grief, it is loss, it's impactful. So being able to be open about it and share how you feel about it and talk about it is very important as well.
And David, your question around people scattered all over and sometimes people cannot come, isn't it so true that in this pandemic, every one of us and all of us are experiencing the same notion that even across the border to US, that you can use about an hour or 2, 5 hours to cross and you are with your family. People passing away, but yet still we were not able to travel because of this pandemic. And this is where what Luann and Ruth had expressed, it all comes into that. What is it that we can do differently to be helpful and supportive? Now, by courtesy of Zoom, people that are going through this, you can hold funeral services via Zoom that you can be close even though you are far away. And sometimes it is not the fault of other people that they cannot travel, sometimes because of financial, because of hardship, because of immigration issues that they've not finalized their papers, because of that they're not able to travel, or even people that are refused visas to travel to another country. It could be a plethora of so many reasons, but anything that we can do differently, hooking up on social media, on video, so that you can feel the closeness, sending messages by, video for them to play it at the funeral so that loved one knows that you've not abandoned the family, that you are there is because of some issues. And one important area that sometimes people hold anger in them is that almost every funeral you go for the eulogy, when people are saying it, people are forced to say nice and pretty things. But sometimes in your heart, you don't want to express that because you have your own personal experience, and the family will fight you that it is a place that you say important and nice things about the person. No, it's not. It is okay to express how you feel, because these are all part of the healing process, that you go through your own healing. But sometimes when the scripts are there that you subscribe to this particular way of doing things, it also adds the fuel that people become even more angry. So, you know, as we change the narrative, education is very important. Then when we know a little bit better, we go away, we adjust things, because I'm sure all of you having your cell phones, you don't have the old BlackBerry phones. You have new phones, you update your apps. Why can't we update our mind like the smartphone? And that every time we adjust the way we're thinking, Paul put it beautifully. He said, let us renew our mind by doing new things as we connect. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for answering that. Listen, the hour is long spent. Thank you so much. We've gone a bit longer than we anticipated we would go. I want to turn it over to Sister Lawrence. She'll give the vote of thanks at this time, and we'll close off with another piece by the Isaac brothers, and then I'll do the final prayer. So, Sister Lawrence, over to you.
Professionals, I thank you. And I thank you for the spiritual aspect of this meditation. Thank you, thank you. I will endeavor to formulate a few points for the general population, put them in point form, and seek also your permission before I get them on newsletter. But it has been a wonderful experience that you have helped us to see both the spiritual aspect and the practical aspect of dealing when we lose our loved ones. There's always much more, but I think there's an opening so we can have a better understanding of how prepared we should be spiritually and physically for Mr. Death. Thanks again. We will now hear from the Isaac brothers. Jesus is coming again.
Jesus is coming again. Amen. Jesus is coming again. So I just want to add my thank you to Sister Lawrence's thank you for Luann and Elvis and Ruth, 3 professionals who can relate to us culturally, who can to bring to us and educate us with this sort of information that is so needed. I want to thank you guys so much for your professionalism, and I pray that God will continue to bless you in your respective industries. So can we close in prayer, please? Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this, your blessed Sabbath day, and the blessings that it brought. In a special way, we want to lift up Luann and Elvis and Ruth before you. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you will bless them in their respective industries. You will help them to continue to grow so that, God, they can be of good service to your people. We pray in a special way that you will continue to help us, that we will take the information that we learned today, that would help us, that we can make decisions in terms of final preparation for our lives here on earth, as well as our loved ones. We pray, oh God, that even as we continue to look forward to Jesus, who is coming again one day, that we will also make preparations for our final resting place here on earth until you come. May you keep us safe. May you keep us healthy. May you keep us strong. May you continue to bless us. Help us that as we go through the rest of the Sabbath day, that we will remember to keep your day holy and to give you thanks in all things. Thank you so much for the wonderful time that we spent. Thank you for the saints who stayed with us. Thank you for the presenters and all the participants. May we continue to trust in you. Oh God, we pray in the mighty name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you all very much. Special thanks to Sister Joan as well for hosting and the technical aspect of this. May God continue to richly bless you and keep you safe.